Black, proud, independent, determined, educated, resilient, compassionate, batty, funny, quirky, unique, creative, thoughtful, sincere, loyal, gutsy, vibrant, resourceful, imaginative, engaging, fabulous, awesome. Those are all words that describe me, the Brick City Brown Chick. Welcome to my podcast, What I Know Now. Thanks for listening.
Hello, welcome back to What I Know Now. This is episode 2. I want to thank everybody who came back from last week and all our new viewers today. I welcome you and I look forward to having you. This is the episode specifically about the podcast itself, what the podcast's about, do's, don'ts, those types of things. So this is going to be the housekeeping episode. That's what we'll call it. So what I know now is what I think of as a life lessons podcast. What does that mean? I am 53 years old. I have lived long enough to have learned quite a few lessons, and I just want to share those with people who have either gone through similar situations and have come out the other side, or people who are currently going through situations who are looking for ways to cope and come out the other side. I want to clarify from the very beginning, I am not a doctor, counselor, social worker, psychiatrist, psychologist, none of those things. So we're clear. I do not dispense medical advice. I am a Gen X woman who has lived through a lot of things that the younger people haven't experienced yet, and even some things that people who are older than me haven't experienced yet. So I really want to share my stories, share the laughter or the pain or the insights that I have, and hope it helps someone out there who's listening to me. So that's the overall point of the podcast, is sharing life lessons. In terms of stories I tell, all the stories will be real. They will all be things that have happened to me or around me in my life. In terms of sharing information about people related to me or friends of mine or whatever, I am going to use people's real life initials because I know I'm not going to be able to keep straight making up fake names for people. My memory's not that quick anymore. So I'll be using real initials, but I will not be sharing people's actual names. The intent of this podcast is not to hurt anyone, is not to disparage anyone. It is simply to share my experiences, and my experiences are mine alone. These will be my interpretations of things that have happened to me, or as people like to say, perceptions. But what I always say about perceptions is perception is reality. If it is happening to you, then it is your reality. So people use the word perceptions like it's a terrible thing, but perception is reality if it is happening to you. I find myself using that phrase over the years quite a bit about work, because people always like to say at work, you shouldn't take things personally, it's work. I'm like, okay, is it happening to me? That means it's personal. It's my perception. So there's that. I really encourage you to share your thoughts and feelings, share things you've been through. I will definitely be reading all the comments. I will, if I choose to share some of the comments I've received from people, know that I will not be sharing your name or your location or anything like that. Again, the purpose of this is not to hurt anybody, out anybody, make anybody feel bad, any of those things. So I will share comments, but not context in terms of who the person is. I want this to be a safe space for people, and I know the term safe space has been taken to a whole different place for people, but what I mean by safe space is I want people to be able to be open and share the way I will, but I really have no tolerance for name calling, racial epithets, uh, sexual epithets, anything like that. So if you're going to try to come into this space and be nasty and negative and make fun of other people, you will be blocked. That's just fact. Um, I really have no patience for people who just want to get into things to be nasty because they have nothing better to do. So we're going to avoid that entirely and just say this is going to be a good, honest, open space. What kind of things are we going to talk about on this podcast? We're going to talk about things that run the gamut. We're going to talk about friendships. That's been a big topic in my age group lately. People who've been friends with people since their teens or 20s, and now they suddenly realize that they don't have anything in common with these people anymore. And how do you end these friendships, and what do you do about them? So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about love and romance and being married. I have been married 24 and a half years. So I'm coming up on my 25th wedding anniversary this year, which is pretty hard to believe, but it's true. Um, I do not give advice about marriage. I really don't. That's not something I do. Every marriage is different. Every couple is different. I can share some things about my marriage and my relationship with my husband and hope that's helpful for people. But marriage advice is a place I don't get into. But we'll talk about marriage and finding the right person. That's a phrase that kind of drives me a little crazy. Um, but what you need to do to make a marriage work and to keep a marriage working. I think a lot of people, especially women, because we're conditioned this way, get into a marriage and think, "Oh, okay, I got the brass ring. I'm married now. It's all good. It's all smooth sailing." Nope. Marriages work every single day. And when you wake up, you have a choice. You can choose to put your energy and effort into it and make it work, or you can choose to not put your energy and effort into it and watch it go away. So we'll talk about, keys to successful marriage and things like that. We're going to talk about work and how work changes as you get older and how your feelings about work change as you get older. I feel very differently about working now that I'm in my 50s as opposed to when, I was a fresh-faced college graduate in my early 20s, and you come out and you just want to take on the world, and then you get kicked down by the world a few times and you realize you need to have a different approach. So we're going to talk about how our feelings about work change. We're going to talk about, love when you're older. A good friend of mine is getting married this year. We're the same age. And so it's very different for folks when you're in your 50s or your 60s and you're figuring out whether you're going to make that commitment or not. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how our relationships with our parents change as both they get older and we get older. My relationship with my mother is super interesting. It's very different than it was when my father was alive, right after he died, or 10 years after he died, to now. Uh, my father was kind of the, I guess a good word is buffer between my mother and I, because we're both headstrong and it can look like this quite a bit. So after he died, she and I had to sort of figure out a new way to get along and to move forward. Are we always successful at that? Absolutely not. Are we mostly successful at it? Yeah, I'd say about 60% of the time. So we'll talk about changing relationships and caring for your aging parents, and also about being what's called the sandwich generation. That's what Gen X was known as very early, when we were in our 20s and 30s and starting to have children of our own, and our mostly boomer parents, although in my case, like I said, my parents are silent generation, they're the generation before the boomers, how you deal with raising your children and coping with your parents getting older and figuring out where they're going to go. Are they going to live with you? Are you going to put them in a home? All those types of things. So we'll talk about that. And anything else that really comes to my mind that I've experienced, how things change, how people change, how relationships change, how friendship changes, and how you yourself change. I am a very different person than I was in my 20s, which I would hope that's true for everybody. But there are some people I know it's really not the case. I don't know how they've managed it, but they're the exact same person. But as you get sort of in your late 40s, early 50s, mid 50s, you really do have a different focus and you have different challenges. You really sit down and think, okay, if I'm being optimistic, like my life is half over for all practical purposes. So, what is it I want to do differently in the next half than I did in the first half? And what kind of things are going to make me happy that I didn't do in the first half? Or what's important to me? As you get older, my opinion is your life becomes more about the you instead of the we and the us. Now, as a married woman, I'm still a we and an us, but my husband and I have different interests, and that's not a bad thing. Like, for example, this podcast. My husband would never go anywhere near this. This is not his thing. He is not on social media. He doesn't watch sports. He's a very specific kind of guy, and I love him. But there are interests I have that he wants no part of, and that's perfectly cool. Just like he has interests I want no part of, and that's perfectly cool. He listens to old radio programs, and when I say old, I mean like from the 1940s and 50s. I can't stand that. But he loves that, and when he's got his alone time, that's what he's into, and that's perfectly cool. So, this is really going to be a podcast about what I've learned, or as it's titled, What I Know Now. I'm going to look at things that happened to me in a certain period of time and then talk about how I felt then. And then we're going to move to now and what I learned between those two spaces of time. Some of these stories will be from when I was a very young child. Some will be from when I was a teenager, and some will be from when I was an adult, when I was a woman in my 20s, a single woman in my 20s, a married woman in my 30s, how things have changed along the line for me. So that's really what this podcast is about. Again, I want this to be a good, positive, open space. Positive doesn't always mean happy. Positive in this case means a comfortable place for people to share what they're feeling, good, bad, ugly, indifferent. That doesn't always mean positive. That doesn't always mean you jump out of bed and you feel great and life's all sunshine, candy, and rainbows. That's not how my life is. And realistically, that's not how most people's lives are. So I really want this to be a space where people are comfortable to share who they are and what they've been through, because that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to share who I am and what I've been through and how I've come out the other side, and how things are different now, in some cases better, and in some cases just different. But you have to be prepared for both those things. So we will start next week with episode 3. That's where we're really going to get into some meaty topics on the podcast. I hope you have enjoyed this episode and that you're looking forward to what's coming next. I know that I am. So I want to thank you again for tuning in this week. If you know someone you think would enjoy this podcast and enjoy my humor, my sarcasm, and what I have to say, please pass this podcast along to them, share it with them. Please sign up for the podcast. I would greatly appreciate that. And I will see everybody next week. Thank you so much. Bye bye.